I'm Bill Larson. I live in Nevada City Commons in Nevada City, California. And I'd like to tell a story about a redemptive experience I had in Vietnam 53 years ago. I was raised in Omaha, Nebraska, in the foothills, in a very conservative Catholic family. So I bought in 100% to everything I was taught. We were not taught to ask questions, we were taught to answer questions. So I believed everything they told me about Vietnam, communism in the world, the Vietnamese being persecuted by these invading communists from China. And I believed it right along with civil rights and all that. I was fully believed in John Kennedy and Camelot in those days of ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. So I was just imbued with that notion. And after Kennedy was killed, I decided I wanted to, after I graduated from college with a teaching degree in 1968, and I decided I didn't want to take a job. I wanted to do something that would give meaning and purpose to John Kennedy's sacrifice. So in between my junior and senior years of college, I chose to go to the Marine Corps, and I spent 10 weeks at Quantico, Virginia, going through an officer training program. I graduated from that program, but was completely turned off to the brutality that I saw acted out against people and animals when I was in that training. So I turned down my commission in my senior year of college, and I chose instead to enter an organization that was very much like the Vista Volunteers, giving service to America. And I joined as a Catholic organization called the Extension Volunteers. And I was training in Chicago in the summer of 1968 when I got drafted. The administrator of the clinic failed to get my paperwork in, and I should have been exempt, but that's not the way it worked out. So I ended up going to Vietnam. I had medic training, I became a medic, and I was stationed in Vietnam and ended up in a company, the 1st Air Cav Division, and we operated solely in the deep jungle, probably in Cambodia as well as Western Vietnam. It was, we never saw Vietnamese. I never saw a Vietnamese village. I never saw anything. So it was really disturbing to me that I had come across the world to help these people who I was told were being persecuted. I never once met any of them. Only Vietnamese I saw were dead and wounded prisoners after our firefights. So on June 2nd, 1969, I was two of our squad, we sent out a squad after flying into next to a bunker complex of the North Vietnamese Army. We sent out a reconnaissance platoon and they got ambushed. 2 guys were left out in the middle of this clearing, and I was the only medic in the company at that time, so I was called up to be at the clearing and render whatever aid I could. I was not supposed to go out into the clearing. The job of a medic was to have the casualties brought to you. But I saw that these guys were really shot up badly. One guy was shot in the head, and the other guy was shot several times through the torso and arms and legs. And I was afraid they would bleed out and die in that because we were not having any luck in getting them out. So I basically crawled into that clearing with my medic bag. I had field dressings I wrapped on the 2 guys around their head and around the different wound configurations. And I started to return fire. Just enemy fire was just pouring in. Most of it coming over our heads because I think we were just a little bit underneath their vision of sight from the ambushers. At one point, I did raise my head. I was going to return some fire, and a bullet hit me square in the jaw, shattering my jaw in what I was told was about 70 places. I was knocked out. I woke up. I couldn't breathe. My face was face down in a pool of blood, and I was starting to suffocate. But I woke up, and it just continued that way until later. I have no idea, an hour, whatever. my best friend, Michael, came and he crawled out to try to help me. He had a field dressing in his hand. When he reached me, he was reaching out with his right hand to put that field dressing around my jaw, and a bullet hit him square through the left eye, blowing out the back of his head and basically squirting his eye fluids into my mangled jaw, which was just hanging off my face. Michael was probably about 10 inches away from me at that point, and he collapsed. So for the next hour, I just went in and out of consciousness, hearing my friend basically suffocate on his own vomit, the way people die in those kinds of situations. At one point, the military said, we're going to throw out smoke grenades to get you guys out. And I said that was a very bad idea because I thought the NVA would just start spraying the area with gunfire, because I was pretty sure they were not wiping us out because they wanted to entice more Americans into the clearing. So I thought that was a horrible idea. I grabbed one of the guys who was still alive, the other had died, and I pulled him over my body, got him in front of me, put my hand right up his butt, and I just started pushing him. And he started groveling with his hands and feet and doing what he could do too. He's a very tough kid. And inch by inch, little by little, I passed out several times along the way, but I finally got about those 5 meters or whatever it was to the clearing. I was up on my right side pushing him into somebody's arms, and 2 more bullets hit me, one through the left shoulder and one through the chest on my left side, went through my lung and out my back. So one thing led to another, and eventually I ended up in a hospital ward in Long Binh, Vietnam, big army hospital. I was utterly depressed and angry, enraged at just about everybody. I don't think I'd ever felt so alone in my life. I was enraged at my family for setting me up to go to Vietnam, the church for condoning the war, the government for enforcing and doing the war. I was not happy with my commanders in my unit, who I didn't think did a good job in protecting their troops. So I was bedbound and really not in a good way, and refused basically to get involved in my own healing. The nurses wanted me to get out of bed and do my own, clean around my bed and do this and brush my teeth and blah, blah, blah. I couldn't brush my teeth really because I was wired shut. But I refused to do that as much as I could. And every time they got me out of bed, I'd just slip away and go back to bed as soon as I could. I was very, very depressed. And I was, one of the great ironies that really depressed me was that I never had met the Vietnamese. I was dedicated to going over there and doing a good work for these people, and I never even met a single Vietnamese. So after about 3 weeks on the ward, 2 little families of Vietnamese were brought into the ward. 2 mothers, one about 40, and she had 2 kids, and one young mother who looked about 18 or 19, and she had a baby. And the kids had been hit by shrapnel. They were bandaged up, so they were in the hospital to get some medical treatment. I witnessed an orderly sexually abusing the young girl as she was walking down the ward with a mop handle. And it was over before I knew it, but it just like, again, it just sent me back into waves of depression at what I was starting to witness. The next morning, the Red Cross guy came along, and he had a cart full with big magazines and stationery and colored paper and pencils and a big bowl of candy, huge bowl of candy. And those little Vietnamese children, when they saw that candy, boy, their eyes lit up like they're looking at a slot machine full of sugar. And the Red Cross guy just shooed him away and told him, no, you can't have any, go away. This is for GI, not for you. And that was it. That's what broke the camel's back for me. And I pulled myself out of bed. I walked over to where they were standing. I pulled the kids back. I got them lined up in front of me, had them pull out their T-shirts and raise their T-shirts like little cups, little bundles, so I could then put my hands into the huge candy bowl, and I just started giving them handfuls of candy, just filling their little shirt with it. And it was such a joy to see their eyes light up with happiness, and they were just beyond themselves. Once that was done, I just went back to bed. I didn't want to be with them. I didn't want to be with anybody. but I couldn't let that pass. Later that afternoon, I was lying in bed, again, went back to bed after the nurses tried to get me out, and I was just depressed and ruminating about my dead friend and all that happened during my 2 months with my company. We had lost 40% of all our people dead or wounded in firefights. And all of a sudden I heard this little pitter-patter, pitter-patter, pitter-patter of several feet on the ward coming toward me. I didn't know what it was and I didn't pay attention, but all of a sudden they were circled my bed. 2 or 3 of the Vietnamese people were on one side, 2 or 3 were on the other side of my bed. They couldn't really speak English, but they were coaxing me out of bed. They were down and had their little hands underneath my shoulders, underneath my elbows. You come, you come. They wanted me to come out of bed. I tried to push them away. I tried to say, go away, but they were very insistent. And they eventually did get me into my robe and got me on my feet. And they walked me, both of them, people on both sides of me, propping me up and walking me out to the veranda right outside the hospital ward. And they pulled up a bunch of chairs and we just sat there. We sat there for maybe an hour. I couldn't talk to them. They couldn't really talk to me. We didn't have language. But what was beautiful was the kids were very unabashed and they were really into it. So the kids would actually crawl up into my lap. My head was crooked. My head was almost on my left shoulder from the whiplash from the gunshot wound. So they would get up in there and they would mock my head and they'd look at my dog tags and giggle and it just was hard not to be affected by that. So it turned out that happened every day. They came up to my bedside at about 3, 4 o'clock in the afternoon every day. Same thing happened. I told them to go away, leave me alone, and they wouldn't do it. They just wouldn't do it. They got on both sides of my bed and they cupped their hands underneath my shoulder and my elbows and drew me out of bed into my bathrobe, and we'd go out and we'd sit outside. And we never did find a way to speak. They knew almost no English and I knew absolutely no Vietnamese, but we just sat there. In some kind of deep camaraderie, which is hard to explain, but was incredibly meaningful to me. After about a week of that, my orders came to be shipped to Japan, or Okinawa, to ship to Okinawa, where I was going to get more surgeries for my jaw, and I ended up staying there for a month too. But I got shipped out when the Vietnamese weren't on the ward, so I never got to say goodbye to them, which was always a very sad thing in my life. Because really and truly, their friendship and their willingness to help this wounded soldier who had bestowed some level of kindness on them was infinitely more valuable to me, I think, than it was to them. And I will never forget that experience of being with them and being on the outside and what that meant for me. And I can only hope that it had some deep meaning for them as well.